It's 2020. Have you been paying attention lately? At any moment, the grid can go down. And although my soul was on ice, I never stopped paying attention to this ever. Could you imagine just sitting there and suddenly the darkness, it'll take over everything. And people talk about generators, but like my guy always tells me, you'll be a beacon of light in darkness. People want what you got. Nothing is sacred when you're walking around a bunch of organic portals. NPCs will lose their fucking mind. Like nothing we've seen before. The chaos that'll ensue, the predictive programming that's taken place over the last 20 plus years. I hope you're ready. I hope you've paid attention, because I believe they have us just where they want us. And with everything that's already taken place in 2020, the Great Conjunction coming in about a month from now, prepare yourself for the next reset of 2020. And just know your own government has you here.
The National Guard and other agencies in Wisconsin will test its preparedness and communication in 5 northeast Wisconsin counties over 3 days in midway. The exercise, called Dark Sky, will simulate a long-term mass power outage.
What happens if my power would be out for 24, 48, 72 hours, or maybe 37 days?
That includes responders from federal, state, and local levels, encompassing private utility groups, the FBI, and fire departments.
The what ifs is what we're trying to do, is fill in those spots for the what ifs.
It'll be all hands on deck here in Omro, with the police, fire department, and the Red Cross taking part in the exercise Dark Sky.
The training kicks off on May 15th and lasts for 3 days. Different counties have different roles, with Dane County serving as a communicator in between.
One way to get at America, and an easy way, quite frankly, is through an EMP attack, an electromagnetic pulse attack.
Consider every major city in America, how does it get its water supply? Consider that every major city in America, its average food supply on hand is 21 to 28 days. Consider, where do we get our medication? Consider what happens in nursing homes and hospitals. What happens to our transportation grid? Anything driven that, well, most of them have computers in them, they're all gone.
An electromagnetic pulse that can cripple everything from stoplights to computers to the defense grid.
An electromagnetic pulse attack, also known as an EMP, could be devastating. It could easily damage the country's critical infrastructure, especially the electrical grid.
If a terrorist organization or North Korea or Iran detonated just a single nuclear weapon at high altitude over the United States, it would destroy the electric grid and our critical infrastructures and put at risk the lives of up to 90% of the American people. We all depend, directly or indirectly, we all live directly or indirectly off of electricity. We're an electronic civilization.
Let me repeat that, 90% of all Americans will die within 12 to 18 months after an EMP event. This study was done in 2008. Has anything been done since? No.
If it sounds far-fetched, consider that last July, a steamer owned by Iran's ally, North Korea, was found in Panama hiding nuclear-capable SA-2 missiles under 10,000 tons of sugar. Experts believe Russia has given EMP technology to North Korea.
In our highly connected, just-in-time, efficient technological civilization, to cause chaos that could cause tens of millions of Americans to die before it's sorted out.
Tens of millions?
Tens of millions. Because if you have no electric power for 6 months to a year, you have no food delivery, you have no gasoline, you have no water. You know, you think about that, it's pretty bad.
Well, that's a horrifying possibility. How are we protecting against that happening?
We're not.
Today, the old duck and cover films from Cold War days seem campy and quaint. To many, a nuclear blast and its resultant electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, seems so unimaginable, so unlikely, that few worry about it, and fewer still take any precautions.
It's not real, and it's something out of a James Bond movie. A general consensus is that it is not a real threat. It's not imminent by any stretch of the imagination.
We have information, for example, the data from actual high-altitude nuclear detonations that were conducted by us and the Russians back in the 1961-62 time frame that did things like knock the lights out in Hawaii.
An EMP is a short burst of electromagnetic energy that all nuclear explosions produce to varying degrees. A large EMP triggered over the United States from an orbiting nuke at the right altitude could fry the circuitry of cell phones, render electronic banking, automobile computers, railways, air traffic control, and airplanes themselves useless. Food would rot in refrigerators and in farm fields, with no means of transporting agri-products to population centers. In the following weeks and months, a truly Mad Max world would evolve. Dr. Pry believes a naivete about EMP pervades the Western democracies, where nukes are kept mostly out of sight and out of mind.
An extraordinary last hour. The entire East Coast went out. Texas followed. Forgive me, I'm being told right now that Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and San Francisco, they have all gone out as well. It's looking like a total power outage across the entire country.
A colossal and history-making blackout,
the likes of which we have never seen before.
Of a brief episode, make it one for my and one more for the road.
I spoke to the two top officials at FEMA. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It would be their responsibility to deal with the consequences of an attack in the immediate aftermath. The deputy head of FEMA, who is a retired Coast Guard vice admiral, told me that in his opinion, in the event that a city like New York or Manhattan was hit, his response would be to evacuate. I said, evacuate 8 million people? Well, he said, you don't leave me with much of an option. If it happens, you've got to take care of the people, and the only way I can see you could do that would be to evacuate. The next day I spoke to his boss and said, what would you do? Would you evacuate? And he said, evacuate? You can't evacuate 8 million people. Where would you put them? So just to respond directly to your question, the two top people at the agency responsible for dealing with the consequences of an attack like this cannot agree on what
family actually need to be doing? Do they need to be, as Ted Koppel has done, stocking up on water and freeze-dried food?
I think those are very important measures. Average citizens need to be able to take care of their own families and their own neighborhoods and their own communities, and not assume that Uncle Sam is somehow going to magically bring in the cavalry and rescue them. Their readiness is not where it needs to be, given that the adversary continues to strengthen the sophistication of the weapons that will be used against the United States.
But to have an extra supply of food and water, to be able to take care of your family and to know that you're not dependent upon government sort of running to the rescue, I think that can actually be quite healthy.
Well, having written the book, I should ask you directly, how prepared are you now?
Not as prepared as I should be, but I have bought some freeze-dried food for the family, for myself and my wife and our children and our grandchildren. We do have a water supply, and we do have backup generators. Is that going to be sufficient? I don't know. I hope never to find out, but I fear that I may.
Well, a serious warning from top national security experts. They say an electromagnetic pulse attack, also known as an EMP, could be devastating. It could easily damage the country's critical infrastructure, especially the electrical grid. Peter Vincent Pride, the executive director of the Electromagnetic Pulse Task Force and Advisory Board on National and Homeland Security, is joining us now. He just wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal documenting the threat to melt the electric grid, which is enough to get our attention. Dr. Pride, nice to have you on the program.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
You have quite the resume of experience. You worked as an intelligence officer for the CIA. You focused specifically as well your career on this threat. When you look at what's facing our nation right now, why is this of such great concern to you?
Because it is the greatest threat that our nation and Western civilization faces. You know, it was deeply classified throughout most of the Cold War, and only after the EMP Commission reports declassified much of the information about EMP did it become publicly known. And so it is one of the least understood threats, and yet the greatest threat that we face. You know, because if a terrorist organization or North Korea or Iran detonated just a single nuclear weapon at high altitude over the United States, you know, it would destroy the electric grid and our critical infrastructures and put at risk the lives of up to 90% of the American people. You know, we all depend directly or indirectly. We all live directly or indirectly off of electricity. We're an electronic civilization. And it's also a threat from nature, you know, because there is such a thing as a geomagnetic superstorm. They've happened in the past in 1859 and 1921, and they're inevitable. It's going to happen again someday. There was a NASA report in last year that said that that we just barely missed by 3 days being hit by a geomagnetic superstorm back in 2012. And when that happens, it could take out electric grids and the critical infrastructures that support life.
The threat of a terror attack is one that needs to be taken seriously now. So says my next guest, former United States Ambassador and former Director of the CIA, James Woolsey. Ambassador, thanks for being with us. And the CIA. You know firsthand how many enemies we have out there. What do you think is the biggest threat to our grid?
They could launch a satellite with a simple nuclear weapon in it. Best if they launch it around the southern pole because we don't have any defenses and very little warning down there. And while it's in orbit, just detonate it. And this could be a very simple nuclear weapon, similar to what we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It doesn't have to be sophisticated at all. Doesn't need any accuracy. You're not trying to hit anything on the ground. You're just detonating a nuclear weapon up 30 miles or so in space. That would take out the grid for probably a quarter to a third of the United States. And if you detonated it up at a couple of hundred miles, it would take out the grid for most of the United States.
And why don't we have the defenses in the southern part, and I talked about this in the open, in the southern part of our nation, so that a satellite could come in and could be detonated? I mean, it doesn't have to even be specific. Why are there no missile defenses down there?
I guess I would say, if I were being flippant, that we've turned over defending the country's electric grid to people with the overall focus of ostriches. Nobody really wants to do anything on this in the federal government except stick their heads in the sand.
And Ambassador, do you think that the power plants across the country have the protection that they need?
No, absolutely not. Nuclear power plants, particularly if hit by an electromagnetic pulse, would melt down before too long, and you'd have disasters emanating from the nuclear power plants as well as from a lot of other sources. If you take out, by taking down the grid, if you take out the electrical system, everything else goes down too. We have 18 critical infrastructures in the country, and 17 of them depend on electricity. So you lose your communication system, you lose transportation, you lose your bank teller system for getting money. Nothing works.